Hello, all listener of the Ukrainian Rus Radio Nash Holos. My name is Anton Lysenko, and today I'm happy to introduce you the professor of the Pennsylvania State University, Miss Кетрін Ваннер. And today we'll be talking about the Ukrainian and American relationship and the religion factor between it. Hello, Miss Wanner, and welcome to the studio of Nash Holos, Ukrainian Rus Radio.
Hello there, Anton.
After a few weeks of voting in the House of Representatives for the aid to Ukraine to resist Russian invasion, the interesting fact began to emerge about how Speaker Mike Johnson made this important decision for Ukrainian and, of course, for American people. The Speaker prayed on the eve of the vote, and also he had a meeting with some Ukrainian Protestant pastor. I understand that American speaker of the House of Representatives, he operate different information. He might have the intelligent information, analytical information to make a right decision. But I want to ask you, Professor, how do you assess the religion factor regarding providing help to Ukraine?
Well, I think you're right in that there is a commitment on the part of the U.S. to support democratic regimes, and specifically Ukraine. There are many points that suggest evidence of a democratic spirit as well as a past history of democracy in Ukraine. And one of them is religious freedom and the right to freedom of conscience. Ukraine, I think, has an impressive record, and certainly a very impressive record when compared with other countries in the former, or what was the former Soviet Union. In other words, prior to the invasion, there had been a significant degree of religious pluralism that had been achieved in Ukraine. A wide spectrum of confessional groups not only established themselves, but established communities and all kinds of civil organizations. And in this sense, we can say that a significant degree of religious freedom is, or was, prior to the full-scale invasion, was in evidence in Ukraine. And this worked to the benefit of many religious minorities in Ukraine who were able to thrive and grow in that country. And this, of course, is precisely what is an example of the kinds of benefits that democracy is intended to deliver.
Representatives Marjorie Taylor Greene has rapidly criticized the Ukrainian government opposing Christians, while Russia, from her point of view, is a defender of the Christianity in the modern world. How do you think, what is the real situation with religion freedom in Ukraine? And do you really believe that Speaker Johnson, who at the same time the conservative Christian, vote to help Ukraine if the religion's repression was really taking place in Ukraine?
Well, it's important to note that both Marjorie Taylor Greene and Mike Johnson, Speaker Johnson, both represent constituents that are overwhelmingly Protestant and heavily evangelical Protestant. By pointing out that among the tragedies that have befallen the people who live in the occupied territories of Ukraine is the fact that there has been tremendous religious repression. That is to say that the kind of religious pluralism and the kinds of religious freedoms that existed throughout Ukraine prior to the full-scale invasion have been most seriously curtailed in the occupied territories. This has worked heavily against evangelical Protestant communities. Specifically, the Donbass was an area of Ukraine where there were a great number of Baptist and Pentecostal and evangelical communities. To the extent that Ukraine was called the Bible Belt of the former Soviet Union, it's because of the predominance of these evangelical Protestant communities in the Donbass. the clergy and the members of these communities have been, by and large, very harshly repressed. They have been seen as traitors, not just to their Slavic heritage, but also traitors to the faith by having abandoned Eastern Christianity and Orthodox Christianity in favor of a Protestant or so-called Western faith. For this reason, there have been quite horrific acts of repression that include, for example, torture and imprisonment, kidnapping, as well as sharply curtailing the rights of such communities to function and even to exist. So it's important that people in the United States who by and large favor freedom of religion understand that those in the occupied territories who are suffering are, to a degree, evangelical Christians. In other words, their own co-religionists. I believe this fact has been pointed out to Speaker Johnson and to Marjorie Taylor Greene. And Speaker Johnson, as has now become obvious, was always, and I think continues to be a supporter of aid to Ukraine. I do believe the majority of congressmen and women also are supporters of aid to Ukraine. There are, however, unfortunately, these days, a few people who choose to highlight other political leaders and other forms of rule as somehow superior to what can be seen as the messiness of democracy. And in this spirit, I would say that Marjorie Taylor Greene is one such example. And this, I think, more so than any kind of denial of the religious repression that exists in the occupied territories, is what is driving her reticence to provide military and other forms of aid to Ukraine.
Thank you for your answer. And you already mentioned about the freedom of religion in the Ukrainian occupied territory. Honestly, we have rapidly heard about the persecution of the religious community and the killing of priests of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and of course the Protestant pastor destroyed church buildings. What is really happening with religion community of the occupied territory of Ukraine?
You know, obviously this is an intensely difficult moment, and it's very important to underline that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church that is part of the Moscow Patriarchate is the religious group that predominates, again, in what is today the occupied territories of Ukraine. This then means that the fighting that is going on in Ukraine that has caused the destruction of, I believe the toll is now well over 600, if not up to 700 religious buildings that have been destroyed as a result of this war, that those buildings are predominantly connected with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church under the Moscow Patriarchate. So in other words, it's important to underline that regardless of what Mr. Putin and the Russian regime says, the religious group that is suffering in terms of losing its building and losing its people is in fact the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. Disproportionately, however, disproportionate to the actual number of members and numbers of communities and clergy, we see significant violence directed at these Protestant religious groups. They are numerically speaking, they are the second most affected religious community, but proportion to size, then they are the first most affected religious group. So we have a disjuncture once again between what is said and what is done. There might be a championing of the Russian world and the validity and the value of Orthodox values that should be political values coming from Moscow, and an intention to install the values, political and religious, of the Russian world in the occupied territories. But at the same time, it's important to note that a great many of the people who have died in the occupied territories were Orthodox believers, and a great many of the religious buildings that have been destroyed, and even monasteries, are also connected ultimately with the Russian Orthodox Church. They are part of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. So ultimately, the believers that they are killing are their own, and the buildings they are destroying are also their own.
In Ukraine, we have many convicted priests of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Moscow Patriarchate, for helping Russian army and justifying Russian aggression. Also, even we have a couple bishops who are under investigation. For example, Pavlo Lebedь, who is better known as Father Mercedes because of his love for the luxury cars. Is the Ukrainian government behaved correctly towards to such people?
Well, there are many ways to interpret the way the Ukrainian government is proceeding. We spoke about U.S. support for Ukraine. While most people condemn the kind of religious repression that exists in the occupied territories, those same people are also concerned that new forms of religious restriction, if not repression, not take root in the rest of Ukraine. And so by and large, there is a certain reticence among policymakers in the United States to see restrictive measures broadly applied to a religious group. Obviously, if individuals have committed criminal acts and have broken the law, and there are many ways to do so, of course, whether it's through financial means or other violations of the law, I think the idea would be that there is a criminal code and there's a court system, and these charges should be investigated, and should they be found credible, then there should be a legal criminal process that should unfold to address such violations. But I think by and large, the same people who are concerned about religious repression in occupied territories are also concerned if there are specific restrictive measures applied towards a single confessional group, especially in view of the fact that many of those who are fighting would perhaps claim, to the extent that they have an allegiance, they would claim that their allegiance is to this particular religious group.
Thank you, Ms. Wanner, for your answer and for your time. And I want to remind our listener that today, a professor of the Pennsylvania State University, Ms. Ketrін Ваннер, joined our studio. And we spoke about the Ukrainian and American relationship and the religion in between this. Please make sure to subscribe on our channel, and we see you next time in our radio show. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.